We had a leak in one of our cabin bunks just underneath the Dorado vent. So in today's episode, it's going to be the first of a two-part series. We're going to show how to remove a Dorado box, look for and solve for whatever issues there happen to be causing the leak, and then reassemble the unit and put it back together. The project started with covering up the bunk down below to catch any drops or drippings or gunk that falls through the opening when I get this thing through. I removed as many screws as I could on this top piece, but I could not actually unscrew the cowl vent from the mount. If you're not sure how a Dorado vent works, it's really a way of getting ventilation in the boat, but keeping water from entering down below. So in the diagram here, you can see the blue arrows represent water coming in the cowl vent from rain or waves, and the red lines represent airflow. The blue water essentially goes into the box itself, and then water will flow along the deck and run out vent holes. Air, on the other hand, will travel its way over either a baffle or, in our case, a ring that goes up through the deck and sticks up about 3 inches into the box, and that's where the airflow will then go from the Dorado box down below into the cabin.
Oh my god!
Jeez Louise, that thing is heavy. Feel that?
I'm not touching that.
It's awesome.
Once I had the cowl vent off, it was now time to actually see if I could remove the screws to take the Dorado box off the deck without destroying the box itself or causing any damage to the deck. Unfortunately, over the years, I think somebody had put epoxy or varnish over the top of the screw heads, and I couldn't even pick out the varnish or epoxy with a small screwdriver enough so that I could actually get a screwdriver or even an impact driver onto the bits themselves. So through the magic of time-lapse, we'll go ahead and advance past this, but I probably worked on this for about 40 minutes. The box has small wooden rails mounted to the deck, and then the box slides over the top of them and screws go into the side. So at this point I really did resort to having to pry this box up off of the deck itself. And you can see here I just tapped a few screwdrivers in right where the screws were and slowly pried this one side up before going to the next. Once the starboard side was pried up off of the small wooden slats, I went over to the port side and repeated the process, and this one came up a lot easier, but you can see here where I was tapping a screwdriver up underneath the box itself and then gently prying upward. Luckily what I ended up doing here was instead of actually pulling the screws up out of the deck, it just split those small rails. That'll be easy enough to replace and minimizes the additional work I'll have to do. Now that I have the Dorado box up off the deck, you can see the brass tube that is extending up through the deck. From the diagram earlier, that's actually what keeps the water from flowing down in the deck, or at least should. It would go around that bronze pipe, and then it flows out underneath the Dorado box itself. So here I'm actually just picking up some of the sealant. There seemed to be some kind of caulk substance on this. It doesn't appear it was butyl tape. I think it might have been silicone or something like that. Now that that's removed, it's just a matter of cleaning up the deck a little bit. There's probably 30 years of garbage and God only knows what came in the cowl vents and got stuck underneath it. There's some sealant. You can tell somebody tried sealing this. It almost looks like from below because it was just oozed out around the top of that pipe that had come up through the deck. And as you can see, Chastity put Foxy there to help us out a little bit. The next step is to remove the small wooden slats that are screwed down into the deck itself. If you remember earlier, these are the pieces that the actual Dorado box was screwed horizontally into, and I cracked those as I pull them up. So I'll have to remove these portions and make new ones. Once all the screws were removed, it was now time to actually lift these up off the deck, and it looks like they had been sealed down with potentially butyl tape, or it could have just been years and years of revarnishes that had dripped down along the side of the Dorado box onto the deck itself. I was shocked as I pulled this off. I could actually see where the teak slats were about twice as thick under the box. I'm a big fan of trying to keep my workspace a little bit neat as I go, just so I can see what I'm facing. And here I just used a deck brush with a little bit of water on it to help pick up some of these parts. It was a bit crude, but it worked. I tried pushing this metal bronze pipe back through the deck, and I just was not able to do it from up top. And then I realized that between the bronze pipe and the actual opening, there were years and years of sealant that had been pumped into there. Some of it looked like it was the same black material that's used to put between the slats on the teak deck, and unfortunately quite a bit of it was dry and brittle and cracked. which is probably helping to lead to the leak that we saw down below. But I was prying this part out just so I could free up that bronze pipe and ultimately release it down into the deck below. And the last part is always cleaning this up. I don't want to chance this stuff blowing overboard, given that it's probably not good for the marine environment. So just using a dustpan and broom to pick up this old pieces of caulk and whatever else happened to be underneath here. After tapping with a rubber mallet from above deck and then pulling back and forth and while using downward pressure, I finally got this piece out of the deck. Once that was removed, the screw I'm actually working on right now is the spot where it tended to leak most often. So once I pulled the decorative sealing down, in a heavy rain, I could see water dripping right around that particular screw that I'm working on now. It was just a matter of taking all of these screws out. A couple of them I could actually turn by hand. Some I was not able to. One of the challenges with a boat built in the late 70s from Taiwan, they did pretty good work and used a lot of bronze screws. The problem is they're all slotted heads. It's very difficult to get them out when they're stuck. They tend to break or even chip a screwdriver at times. I finally ended up having to resort to using an impact driver. I normally like to try and do something a little less impactful, but using the impact driver was able to ultimately break the screws loose, and I was able to get 3 of the 4 out. The one I'm working on now is just stubborn as can be, and I never was able to get it out of there. I'd love to say that I had the patience to, file a new groove in it or drill it out, but instead I went down to the brute force method. So I kind of rotated this piece of wood back and forth and then applied some downward pressure and basically popped this screw out of the deck, knowing that I'm going to have to probably patch the hole where it is. I then used an average paint scraper just to scrape the bottom of the fiberglass here, get any kind of sealant that might have been on it or rough spots on the fiberglass cleaned up. Just a matter of getting this a bit clean and prepping the surface for the next piece that's going to go on, including the sealant around the hole.
I'm not trying to determine if these screws are long enough that they're going all the way through the bottom layer of fiberglass, the core, and the top layer of fiberglass. And sadly what I noticed right here is that the length of the screw goes through that spacer board all the way up through the bottom layer of fiberglass, the core, and just through the top layer of fiberglass into the bottom of the teak. So unfortunately I am going to have to pull out that broken bolt and re-drill out through all the way through the layers and then epoxy it to make sure it's a good, solid, non-leaking solution when I'm done.
The first step in doing that was to go ahead and mark a small spot around the screw using an oscillating cutting tool to trim some of the fiberglass out. My goal here was to cut maybe half the thickness of the fiberglass from the bottom side and be able to get a pair of vice grips onto the broken screw, the part that's exposed there, and ultimately remove the screw from the deck. This was, to me, was a little bit better a solution than cutting a hole all the way through and then patching it and filling it all the way up with fiberglass and filler. So for me, this worked pretty well. I was able to cut this out of here. I won't show all the footage, but I cut this out, used a small screwdriver and a mallet to tap out about the bottom thickness or half the thickness of the fiberglass, and then twist that screw out with a pair of vice grips. Once this was removed, I always found it a little bit helpful to show what the actual deck looked like after something like this is removed. So you can see where I'm pointing here is the teak layer, a thin layer of fiberglass. This is the actual 3/4 inch plywood core, the lower layer of fiberglass, and then this thick piece of wood that was just a spacer between the actual plywood deck and the dropped ceiling where the decorative bronze port actually mounted. That kept it all very solid instead of mounting it on the artificial drop ceiling, if you will. The really good news out of doing all this work was the actual core itself, where I'm pointing here. I took a screwdriver and even my fingernail, and that core is good and solid, so the water intrusion hasn't caused an issue. You can see where I've removed this from the deck. I'm pointing to the actual screw holes that held those small wooden slats down, and I'll drill those out and fill them with epoxy before we end up replacing everything. We hope you found part 1 of this video useful. Part 2 of the video is going to be replacing the Dorado box or repairing it, reassembling all the parts, cleaning the bronze, and ensuring a leak-free installation. If you found this video useful, please do like it down below with a thumbs up, and please subscribe to our channel for updates on all of our new videos. Thanks from the sailing vessel DreamChaser.